Well, this is my college car, and wasn't she a beauty? I had a green one before this. I think I've shown that picture as well. And I had a red one. I had a yellow one. I mean, Volkswagens back then, these little Beetles, they were pretty cheap, and I would buy them. I loved them. I loved working on them. They were easy to work on. This one had some problems. As you can see, it was a little rusty. In fact, the floorboard's completely rusted out. In fact, there was a hole in the front. I could stick my feet through the hole. And just for kicks, when people would, wave at me or whatever in town, and if I knew one of my friends, I would stick my feet through and act like I was Fred Flintstone pushing the car along. But one of my friends, I was doing this, was actually, he was laughing because I was like pushing the car when I was at a stop sign. And he was laughing, and all of a sudden my seat went, the seat literally fell through the floor. But the biggest problem that I had with that Volkswagen, and actually all of my Volkswagens, if you've ever had one of these Beetles, the heating system was awful. It ran through the exhaust because they're air-cooled. And the heat would not work. And I don't think I ever had a Volkswagen where the heating actually worked in the wintertime of freezing cold. But the problem with the defrost was really bad because if you had frosted windows, and I remember I would get the car started to try to get it warmed up, and it would be a little bit of heat that would be coming out the front dash to go up on the windshield, but not much. It was barely. And I remember getting out then and scraping and then rush back in to get going right away because I knew what would happen. It was going to freeze up right away, and I'd only have this little tiny sliver that I would be able to look through. And in fact, one time I got pulled over. I guess that's illegal. We have some police officers here, and evidently you would probably tell me it's illegal. You're not supposed to be driving like this. None of you have ever done that, right? You've never tried to drive through that little hole there you can't see. And it is, and that's what the cop said. He just gave me a warning. He said, you really got to keep that straight. The problem is, it wouldn't just, as soon as I'd get in the car, and because it was so cold, my breath would fog up the inside and it would freeze as well. I'd have to scrape the inside of the windshield while I'm driving. But when it's like that, it's really hard to see. And that's what it's like when you got a frosted up window and you're trying to drive and using that little hole to drive. You can get into an accident pretty quick because you can't see where you're going and what you're doing. Actually, last year, right about this time, I was driving with a friend on the road between Syria and Israel. Dark night, the most winding road that I have ever been on in my life. It was really foggy out. There were Syrian outposts on one side, Israeli on the other, and we were just thinking, we better not take the wrong turn. We were driving like a turtle, and it was one of the worst feelings. And it's this very idea that Jesus brings up. Because so many people are living life like that. Making decisions, trying to make progress, leading at work, doing marriage, parenting, budgeting with ice on our windshield. And yeah, I was an idiot for driving with just barely a little hole to look through, but my guess is some of you are guilty of navigating a part of your life that way. Making decisions, big decisions, with ice on the windshield. And the scariest part of all of this is we don't realize how poorly we are seeing things. Because you can't see blindness looking in the mirror. We're oblivious to the fog. You might think you're in the clear, but Jesus might surprise you on this one. So we're looking at Matthew chapter 5, verse 8. Grab your Bibles, open up to that, and it's page 810. If you're using one of those blue hardcover Bibles, we've got those available, and all the chairs are underneath in the rack in front of you. You can grab one of those. We've also got notes in the bulletin or notes on the app. It's really easy to use, beneficial to use those notes. And let's begin with prayer. Father, we thank you for your word. We believe it is true, and we receive what it says. In the name of Jesus, open our hearts and engage our minds. Amen. So we're back up on that hill where Jesus taught the crowds the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon that he ever preached, the greatest sermon that was ever preached. We're still in the Beatitudes. And this one, though, this one I'm really excited about. There were people that were scrunching in. Of course, there were latecomers, and they were still arriving, just like some of you did during the third song. And they're showing up. It's getting tighter and tighter, and people are straining to see him. And it's not that he was anything special to look at. In fact, the scriptures describe him as just being plain. Nothing, not that he was frumpy or unkempt or looking like Junior or anything, but we know he had an expensive robe. It was probably given to him. It was probably given to him by some wealthy person, but Yet his eyes, they were terrifying to any demon-possessed person. He would lift those calloused, rough-hewn hands that he'd used for many years as a carpenter, which was actually handling blocks, not so much wood, but blocks. But he was really nothing special to look at. And yet the crowds, they were jostling to get a better sight. And I think that he had to smile as he said these words while they were trying to see him. And he says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Again, quite possibly my favorite beatitude. The simplicity of this statement, and yet the depth. So we're going to look at it a little bit closer. Now, first of all, you see the word blessed. We talked about that a few weeks ago. That's just the word makarios. And in many versions, it's translated happy, and I think that's a good translation. That's really what it means, that you receive this fulfillment, that happiness that everybody has looked for. And he's going through this whole list of the happiness isn't something that you can chase after and get, but instead it's farmed, and it comes by living a certain way. And so he gives us this series of this is how happiness comes. And the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, in a sense, is illustrating or giving practical application of all of these beatitudes. So that's the makarios, blessed. But then he says, blessed are the pure in heart. Now that word heart is the word cardia. And it does mean the blood pump, and they knew about the physical heart, but it meant more than that. I mean, have you ever wondered why? Why do we say, I love you with all my blood pump? Why do we say that? Well, actually, the meaning of the heart, it goes back into biblical Old Testament, and that's used as well in the New Testament. Not the way, I've heard a lot of people say, well, the heart is the seat of emotions, and it's not. That's a misunderstanding. The heart in the ancient world, it stood for desires. We'd say it's the seat of desires. So happy are those with pure desires, we could say. Now the pure there is the word katharos, and it means clean. As in, if you're going to clean something up, you'd use the verb form of this, or if you'd say, well, my office is clean, which my office is usually kind of clean, but I'm a bit cluttery, and so I usually have some things on my desk and so forth. So it's not. I wouldn't say it was katharos. It's not pure because there is some clutter there, but this means that it has nothing that doesn't belong there. When it came to the metallurgy of the day, they would talk about the purity of a metal. Now, the Sumerians found that when you mix copper with tin, you get this very useful metal alloy called bronze, and this ushered in the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age came. But by the time we get to Jesus, there was a lot of mixing metals, and the word that they would use for non-alloyed metals where there was nothing mixed into this, was katharos, or unalloyed, unmixed and without slag or impurities. So Jesus is saying, happy are those with unalloyed desires? I mean, you're thinking, you're just confusing me, Scott. I don't think you're very good at this teaching thing. I get it. But just as katharos is an unmixed metal, here Jesus is calling for an unmixed heart. And katharos and cardia together, you could say that the verse this way, happy are those with unalloyed or unmixed desires, and mixed with what? Well, mixed with sin or selfish intentions. Happy are those with unmixed, unalloyed desires or unmixed intentions. That's essentially what he was saying. Maybe an example of this, as I mentioned earlier, I was in Africa. Junior and I both went last January, and we went to visit some pastors that we had just begun to support. I mean, it's amazing. For less than $100 a month, we're supporting these guys full-time. That's their full-time job. But these guys were amazing. Now, it was a dangerous place where we were at. They didn't want us leaving the compound where we were staying. We were there for a week. But a whole week there without ever being able to leave. I mean, we did. We snuck out a couple of times and just went for walks, saw the sunset, and saw some pretty cool sights. But for the most part, when we left, we'd have to go with one of the pastors or somebody that was African. And so, but these guys, I mean, these pastors, they were BA dudes. I mean, they were living in the midst of persecution. They'd come from another part of Africa where it was not persecuted, where they had become believers. They had such a heart for the other people of Africa So they went to Muslim areas where Christianity in many cases was illegal. The country we were in, it was legal, and yet there was a lot of local persecution against Christians. They would go into villages where there were no Christians. This guy went into a village where there were no other Christians, got into a house, and began just doing Bible studies with whoever he could find. And slowly but surely, a few people started accepting Christ. In fact, there was a couple of women that had accepted Christ, and they had children, and their husbands got so mad at them, they beat them and kicked them out. So he actually took in, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 other families in their home. And their house, I would dare say, was probably smaller than anybody's house here. And I was there. I was at his house. And he had 2 or 3 other families, women and their children. In fact, one of the women that he brought in with her kids, she was pregnant at the time. And she gave birth after she lived there, and his wife helped her in giving birth. And she named, all she had ever called him was Pastor. They would call her Pastor, just Pastor. And so when the baby was born, she named the little boy Pastor. I met little Pastor. That's his first name, is Pastor. But this guy was incredible. And they would ride dirt bikes between villages to do other Bible studies and try to get something else, another Christian witness going. And in fact, we bought them dirt bikes. Our church bought them dirt bikes, paying a bunch of their salaries, bought them dirt bikes. And I mean, it's a great ministry. Africans Reaching Africa is the ministry that we're part of. But we went out riding. He took us out riding. You can see the dirt bikes behind us there. And of course, both Junior and I love riding motorcycles. These dirt bikes, all the dirt roads with lots of ruts and bumps and so forth. It was a blast. But it was time to go back. And I don't know, in the conversation, he had said something about a family that he'd been witnessing to where they raised pigs. And we wanted so badly, we didn't want to end the day, so we wanted to keep riding around. And so a Junior said, hey, and he said that we buy pigs from them. I said, well, why don't we go and get one? He said, well, we don't really have, it's not in our budget right now, but we'll get one next month. And so both of us spoke, oh, no, we'll buy it for you. We'll get it for you. And so now, I have to say, I did want to help the family out. I wanted to get them a pig. But the bigger part of this is I want to do some more riding. I want to go visit another village. I wanted to see this family that had 11 kids and are raising pigs. I just thought it'd be kind of fun to see. And those are some mixed intentions there. So my motives weren't entirely pure. I did want to help him out with a pig, but I also just wanted to keep on riding. And you understand that. You get your boss a gift. Your boss doesn't need that gift. And maybe you're trying to bless him or her, but maybe instead you're also trying to be in their good graces. You do something good sometimes and you hope someone sees. There's some trash on the floor and you pick it up and you're looking around when you're going to throw it away. Is anybody noticing this humble act of service that I am doing? We do have those mixed intentions at times. There was a lady who called the church, this is a few years ago, several years ago now, and she was mad about something. She was unhappy because she wasn't getting her way on something, and I don't remember what the issue was anymore, but I explained to her, I said, well, this is where the elders are at with this, and this is what we've decided to do, and she just kept on arguing with me, and then finally she goes, do you know how much money I gave last year? It's like, oh, sweetheart, so your gift was entirely given to Jesus to build his kingdom and to help his work and to bless the church, and that's what your gift was all about. I didn't respond at all to her, but we do that. Sometimes parents, we want our kids to behave, and a lot of that is for their benefit, but a lot of it all is also like the one mother who, she was just being honest. She's saying, the struggle that I have is I too often see my children as little trophies of the kind of mom I am. And I think that sometimes I make being a mom an idol of my own, and I want my children to look good to everybody else so that they can be my trophies. And I think she was just being the honest one. I think all of us who are parents have struggled with that at times. And honestly, I have to check and recheck myself all the time. And truthfully, as an introvert, I really don't like attention. I don't like, I enjoy my alone time. I love people, I do. I love all of you. But I'm not excited about getting up on the stage, and when I hear guys say, oh, I just love to preach, I question that, maybe because I'm an introvert, and it's like, maybe you just want a lot of attention. But the truth is, I also get some real satisfaction out of it. I know I'm up here, and I'm the center of attention. Everybody's looking at me. I have to check and recheck myself all the time. In fact, years ago, we had a guy that we would have him come and speak periodically, and we ended it just... I had a conversation with him about it, but he was always the hero of his own stories. Every story he told, he was like the hero of the story. And I finally said, we don't want that. But I have to watch myself very carefully, because if I have a mixed heart, sin, it may be sin or also selfish intentions, that keeps me from seeing the activity of God around me. And the more our intentions are mixed, the more blind we are. Do we want to see God? Because a mixed heart leads to spiritual blindness. For example, years ago when moonshine was kind of a big deal, not that it's never done anymore, but back when, the earlier 20th century, the 19th century, a lot of moonshiners, and some of it was just to escape. Some of it was in dry counties, but some of it was places where they just were trying to escape the taxes. But the problem was, and part of it was that the problem was that people were going blind from the moonshine. Because when you make moonshine, the first little bit that comes out, if that gets mixed in with the whiskey, that is the kind of poison that actually causes blindness. And you're thinking, now, is our pastor teaching us how to make whiskey? No, of course not. But these toxic batches led to cases of men becoming blind, which coined the term moonshine blindness. And this is the case Jesus is making with our hearts. When there's impurities, whether it's sin or mixed intentions, all of this becomes deadly. It's a deadly mix that leads to spiritual blindness. We're driving through life with frosted windshields. We're not able to see life as it should be from God's perspective. And worst of all, we're not really seeing God and how he wants to work, how he wants to move, and how he wants to lead us. And the scary part is we don't even realize it. Because once again, being blind to our own blindness, it's a difficult topic because you can't see it when you're looking in the mirror. It's very rare for someone to actually realize their own blindness. We tend to live oblivious to what we can't see. So initially, in this message, we're going to talk about some signs of spiritual blindness, but the more we looked at this passage and what Jesus was getting to, that he wasn't trying to tell us to see better. That's actually seeing God. Seeing better is the byproduct. The action Jesus is calling us to is purifying, is purity, unmixed hearts. And essentially, this is the lesson that he's teaching. Purity leads to clarity. Purity leads to clarity. For example, if you've ever read the autobiography of Ronald Reagan, it's actually very entertaining, a lot of funny stories in it, but one of those was when he was a little boy and he was evidently very blind, could not see at all. And none of the pictures show him with glasses on, but he eventually got contacts. But early in his life, he didn't have glasses or anything. In fact, he was doing very poorly in school. His parents just thought he didn't have the mental capacity to handle school, but he couldn't see the chalkboard and couldn't see his books very well. Until they were riding along in the car out on one of those dirt Illinois roads and went over a bump or something, and his sister, who had glasses, they fell off her face onto the floor, and he reached out and was going to get him for her, but then just out of fun, he put him on. And he said he actually exclaimed out loud, "Whoa!" Because for the first time, the clarity took him back. He didn't know that his eyesight was poor until he put on the glasses and he had clarity. Purity leads to clarity, and does so in our relationships. I was doing some counseling, and this has happened a few times, but back when I did some counseling, and a woman was talking to me, she was just getting out of what she called a toxic relationship. The more I talked to her, I realized it was toxic on both ends. He was toxic for her, and she was toxic for him. And she had said a number of times there was a lot of red flags. And then she said, at one point, she said, I didn't see any of the red flags. My friends and my family, they were pointing out the red flags. I didn't see any of these red flags. And I said to her, I asked her, I said, were the two of you having sex? They weren't married. Were you having sex? And she goes, well, what does that have to do with it? Yes, but that has nothing to do with it. I said, no, it does, because purity leads to clarity. It's actually, God has designed that physical aspect of marriage in such a way that it actually, and this is what a lot of studies have shown, that intimate relationship, physical relationship, it produces a kind of an addiction. That God intends for husbands and wives to become addicted to each other. And that's a good thing. So what happens is when the sexual relationship begins, even if the couple are not married, they wind up having their eyes closed to all of those red flags and weaknesses, which is, that's a good thing when you're married, because What Ben Franklin said, keep your eyes wide open before marriage and half shut afterwards. The problem is when a couple are dating and if they start getting physical during that dating relationship, their eyes go half closed because that intimate part of the relationship is designed to help us do that, to be drawn in and locked into that person. And in fact, Louise Massey, some of you might even remember her. She was the pastor's wife of this church back in the late 50s through the 60s, early 70s. And Louise and Craig Massey was the pastor of the church, and they used to do couples counseling together. She used to say this all the time. I'd have a couple of people tell me this. When they were doing a lot of fighting, there was a lot of nitpicking going on, she would just blurt out and say, well, the two of you need to have more sex. It's like, hey, bring back Louise. And she's passed on now. But she would say that because when there's lots of intimacy, when there's very little intimacy, then you become real nitpicky and your eyes become open to all of the problems. When there's lots of intimacy, you kind of close down to all of those things. And it kind of goes back to what we're talking about here because if we're pure in our relationships, then we have clarity in those relationships, whether it's before marriage or after marriage. Purity leads to clarity also in leadership. For example, if a CEO sleeps with an intern, that becomes a scandal. That's a big deal. A lot of times he'll lose his job. Used to be he'd always lose his job. Now they sometimes will overlook it, but it's always a scandal. Politician or whatever, somebody who's got a high position of authority. But if the grocery bagger down at Jewel has an affair with one of the other baggers, that's no big deal. I mean, we wouldn't even know about it. That's no scandal. Because there is something about the level of leadership and the need for clarity in leading others where purity in our morals and how we conduct ourselves is necessary. My son down in New Orleans, he sent me this picture. It was this major pileup down right outside of New Orleans. In fact, it's a highway that, actually, my son and daughter-in-law, Brock and Aubrey, have COVID right now for the first time. They'd never had gotten COVID up until just now. And so even though he's not very sick, he still had to take off work for it. So he missed this. This is the highway that he patrols, but they had this major pileup. I forget how many people were killed. A bunch of people were killed. It was really bad. But they blamed it on superfog, which is this condition where smoke and fog mix together, and the visibility is as little as 10 feet or less. So all of a sudden, they were just driving into blindness, major pileup. And it started because the guy who was up in front couldn't see where he was going and braked. And the people behind him didn't see that he had braked and ran into him. And so they just turned into this big pileup. If the person in front, if the leader doesn't have clarity, everybody behind is going to suffer for the lack of clarity of the person in front of them. I was at a conference a while ago, and in the breakout session, one of the other pastors at this conference was to lead this breakout session. And I got nothing out of it. It wasn't helpful at all, mainly because the subject that we were supposed to be talking about, we talked a little bit about that, but the guy who was leading that discussion time wanted to keep talking about himself and his own experiences and how he was the leader in this. Rather, he was supposed to facilitate the discussion, get everybody going, but he was more focused on getting himself out there. Those mixed intentions that wind up ruining, because he was supposed to be the leader, wound up ruining the whole discussion. But here we are, we're trying to lead our homes, we're trying to parent, we're trying to do marriage, we're trying to run our teams, teach our classrooms, but we're not seeing clearly because impurities in our heart are obstructing our vision. And those under our leadership suffer because we're blind to those things that matter most, to spiritual things. The moment a leader holds on to sin, those that they are leading suffer. So for those of us who are entertaining sin, secret habits, addictions, attitudes, or desires, sin in our heart, and often we'll make the excuse, well, nobody knows about this, so it doesn't really matter, but that absolutely is not true. That is a lie from hell. That sin is severely hurting many because it is blinding you, and you're not able to be the leader that you're supposed to be. You're not clear and fresh. The impurity in your heart is stunting those under you. Leaders need clarity. Therefore, leaders must treasure purity. Maybe possibly you haven't gotten that promotion or that invitation into something you'd love to do with more leadership, or that opportunity that you wish you had. maybe it's because God is saying, you don't have the purity to thrive in that role. So leadership leads to clarity in relationships and leadership and in spirit. Last February, we noticed that, particularly in our family room, which doesn't have a basement underneath it, it used to be a breezeway and it was turned into a family area. But because it's a colder part of the house, especially that part of the house, in order to get it warm in there, we'd have to make it way too warm in the rest of the house and also burn too much fuel. And I thought, well, it shouldn't be because it was doing fine just a couple of months ago. So I just thought, out of the blue, I thought, in fact, what we did is we tried a lot of things. We tried adjusting the ducts. I would go down and check the duct work, and there's like little levers and stuff you can turn off and on different ducts, and I tried to get it, and Linda was there by the blower, and we were on the phones, and she would say, okay, there, no, and she kept saying, no. And so I'm down in the basement doing this stuff with the duct levers, and I went over to the furnace, and I pulled out the furnace filter. The thing was black. I mean, it was totally black, and when I showed it to Linda, she goes, oh, that's why the house has been so dusty, too. A lot more dust than before, and the impurity wound up spreading all through the house, and it was blocking everything. It was blocking the fresh air from being able to blow through. Impurity hampering a fresh flow of the Spirit, not just the fresh flow of wind or heat in our house, but it also impedes the fresh flow of the Spirit in our lives. We got used to it, and we just didn't notice it. In fact, Paul wrote to Timothy that the conscience is that way. He said that people have, their consciences used to bother them about things, but because they repeat this stuff over and over and over, that there's no longer this fresh flow, that instead their consciences have been seared. You remember when Facebook or Instagram first started having reels, and you started scrolling reels, and you were a little appalled by some of the trash that was on those reels. But then after a while, you started getting used to it, and now you live with it, and you're okay with it. You're not, or maybe it's television. Man, some of the shows that Christians watch today Christians would never have watched just a decade ago. But now we're totally fine with that stuff. We go to movies, and there's nudity in the movies. And it used to be, we'd never go to a movie where there's nudity. And even today, Linda and I will not. We absolutely will not. But after a while, it's like, well, it's all over the place. I mean, you can't get away from it. So, because the filter's dirty. The filter's gotten really dirty. And there's dust getting all through the house, and the fresh flow of the Spirit isn't what it used to be. Or you go to church and you wonder, man, some people are really into this. I'm not, though. How come I'm not into it? I'm not sensing the stuff that they're sensing in that spiritual environment. How come? Maybe that the filter has gotten blocked up. Last spring, I had a couple come to talk to me, and they had big smiles, and they just said, man, Pastor, it's been 10 years now since we've been coming here. 10 years. And every weekend, man, every Sunday we get more out of it. And we're more excited today than we were 10 years ago. And that same week, I think it was a day, maybe 2 days later, I had another couple want to come in and talk to me, and they said, we've been here 10 years now, and we're just not getting much out of the services anymore. We just need to go to a new place. Well, 2 conversations in the same week, within a day or 2 apart. What's the difference between their experience? Well, I think it's the difference between a non-restricting clean filter and a dirty one that's hampering the free flow of the freshness of God's Spirit in and through their lives. So how do we get there where we have that purity that leads to clarity? How can we get that? Well, we really can't by ourselves. We can't develop pure hearts or clean up our hearts by ourselves. That would be impossible for us to do. It's why David cried out. He said to God, create in me a clean heart. Oh God, you do this, and you renew a right spirit within me. Because of the purity of our hearts, we're up to us. We'd never be able to get it cleaned. The prophet Jeremiah declared, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? He says, who can know their own heart? Because it's so deceitful. We quickly convince ourselves all the time, well, my heart is in a good place, though. And sometimes people make an apology, well, I'm sorry for saying that nasty thing, but I didn't mean it. Well, is that really true? Or that wasn't my intent. We'll do something terrible or say something terrible, say, well, that wasn't my intent, because we're trying to cover up for, we're saying, my heart was really good in this, even though I said something really terrible. And that's really not a clear and open confession, because we wouldn't start defending ourselves by saying, well, yeah, but I didn't mean, no, we said it because we meant it. But we're trying to talk ourselves into saying, well, no, my heart was good in this. You think your heart was good because your heart is deceiving you, and you are often fooled by your own intentions. And the heart is not completely in the right place. You can't do this yourself. You need God for this. And so James, Jesus' half-brother, helps us out, because here's what he said. He said, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. So how do you cleanse your hands? That's the behavior. How do you purify your hearts? That's the desires, the intentions. How do you do that? Well, right here, he says, it's by drawing near to God and allowing him to be the one. As David had said, create in me a clean heart, O God. It's by drawing near to him, because what happens is the closer we get to God, the closer we get to him, the more that we become sensitive, and he points out those things. But David had even said that when we get closer to God, the closer that we get to God, that he plants desires within our hearts. He gains control over our hearts, our desires, the seed of desires. The more we know God, the closer we are to him, the more we want what he wants, and we reject the things that he rejects. Well, you already saw this picture up here, but we'll put it up again. Fanny Crosby. And most people here probably don't know who Fanny Crosby is. There's people here that were raised in church, and maybe, decades ago, just a couple of decades ago, actually, so many of the songs that we sang. In fact, I remember being in church back in the late 70s when I was a new believer, early 80s, where we'd sing 3 hymns, and all 3 hymns were written by this woman. She was the most prolific hymn writer, Christian songwriter, I think, in history. She wrote over 8,000, nearly 9,000 hymns. And they were really made popular in the Chicago area because Ira Sankey, who was D.L. Moody Bible Institute, gets its roots from D.L. Moody, who was a big name in the Chicago area in the late 20th century, or late 19th century. And his song leader, Ira Sankey, he made all of her hymns popular. And most of us are still familiar with Blessed Assurance. Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Heir of salvation, purchased of God. I'm just saying all this by memory, but beautiful, beautiful song. And she wrote so many of these songs. Well, Fanny became blind at about 6 weeks old. Had a cold, and they treated oozing of the eyes with a salve that actually was poisonous and wound up killing the nerves in her eyes, and she lost her sight. But it never seemed to bother her. In fact, she was 8 years old when she wrote her first poem. And that's certainly way better than anything I could write today. This is her poem. Oh, what a happy soul am I, although I cannot see. I am resolved that in this world contented I will be. How many blessings I enjoy that other people don't. To weep and sigh because I'm blind, I cannot nor I won't. But I wanted to bring up Fanny because despite the fact that she had physical blindness, she wrote this somewhere around mid-time of her life. She said, if perfect earthly sight were offered me tomorrow, I would not accept it. I might not have sung hymns to the praise of God if I had been distracted by the beautiful and interesting things about me. That is around about me, not about me, but around about me. If I had perfect earthly sight and to be able to see all those beautiful things, it probably would have distracted me from just looking at him and to be able to write the songs that the Christian community used for over 100 years. In other words, she was saying, my physical blindness helped me make my spiritual sight clear, and that matters more. Is that really our unimpeded desire? God, I just want to see you more. I just want to see you more than anything else. I want to see what you're doing and where you're leading. Or as Moses declared, show me your glory. I just want to see you. I've recently added a line in my morning prayer time. I want to see you, God. I want to know where you're working. I want to know how you're leading. I want to see your involvement, your guiding and directing. So convince me or convict me of my impurities. Point out my sin. Expose my selfish intentions. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. You know, not long after Jesus said these words, his physical cardia, his physical heart, it quit beating. He died physically and went through spiritual death so that he could fulfill the prophecy that the prophet Ezekiel gave when God spoke through Ezekiel and said that you have a cold, hard heart, but I will give you a new heart. Jesus' death on the cross on our behalf, when we embrace him by faith, we receive this new, beating, purified spiritual heart to be able to see God. This is why this is such a big deal to Jesus. Because with the gift of that new heart, why would we want to crud it up again with all of those selfish intentions, all of those impurities? Well, that leads us to our so what question. And let's just personalize this. What impurities are impeding your clarity? Driving through life, is that windshield really all cleaned off and clear? Or are some things impeding it? Let's just listen to his Spirit for a few moments. And then when it's time, Jonathan will sing.